Welcome back to MediaScience MYTH BUSTING. I'm your host, Philip Lomax, and I'm joined by Dr. Dwayne Varan. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing the myth that 6 seconds is too short for an ad. So Dr. Varan, what have you found in your research?
So this is work that we first did in collaboration with the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. At the time, there were no 6-second ads in the ecosystem, if you will. So we actually began our testing using 7-second ads because 7 was more or less half of a 15, and so that was kind of like the idea. But the work that we did was really seminal, and I have to say that over time, everything that we've done since has actually further reinforced the findings that we had way back then. And so what we decided to do was test in a future scenario where 6-second ads might be possible, what kind of effect would you expect to see with those kind of ads?
And what kind of effect did you see?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So if you think about a 30-second ad, there's a lot of research, ours included, that finds that the effect of a 15-second ad is about 80% of a 30. So if you think about it, if the cost was half, you're not getting 50%, you're getting 80%.
80% of the value.
And so you're getting a higher value, if you will, as a consequence of going to the 15 instead of the 30. And also, conversely, if you go to 60 seconds, which is a full minute, you're not getting 200%, you're only getting 125%. So in actual fact, it doesn't make a lot of sense from a financial point of view, at least, to be moving up to the 60-second ad because you're not getting a lot of value. But the question was, what is the value of a 6-second ad? And the key question there really is around, is it 20%, which is what that would represent in time? Or is it even less? Because there was an argument that said it wouldn't even deliver that because it was just too short. But what we discovered in the research was that it's actually delivering 60% of the memory of a 30. So that was really seismic. Again, not only us, but other people have done research in the years that have followed this, and they're finding results that are relatively similar.
How did you go about measuring this?
Well, the hard thing, of course, was creating all the ad units. And some of those ad units were what we called cut downs, where we took a 30-second ad or a 15-second ad and we cut them down. And some of them were actually, where we had to actually create the intrinsic value of cutting some shots, doing it so that it actually kind of like had its own standalone value. And both of those were needed for the way that we kind of like designed the study. But yeah, then we had cells where people either saw, with content with 6-second ads in them or 15s or 30s. And we had a lot of different questions that we were really testing within that study design.
I'm sure most marketers and creatives would argue that 6 seconds is still, regardless of these results, not very much time to tell a story. How could these professionals leverage 6-second ads?
Well, the ads work in different ways. Let's try to understand some of the mechanics of how these really work. So there's one type of 6-second ad where the value of the ad unit is actually extrinsic to the ad. It's not really about what happens inside the ad itself. It's about something that happens outside the ad. Specifically, what I mean here is that there is a longer version of the ad out there, and people have first been exposed to that longer version, whether it's a 30 or a 15. And then the idea is that when you see it again as a 6, even though you're only seeing a part of the ad, you're playing it back in your head as if you saw the whole ad. It's reminding you, it's cueing your memory, and so you're remembering the ad. In fact, one of the things that we've discovered, not only in this original research, but in work that we've done since then, is that if you look at the combinations of ads, if you look at a 15 and a 15, a 30 and a 30, a 30 and a 15, you actually get very similar results with a 15 and a 6 or a 30 and a 6 as you're getting. And so the value of using it in this way to reinforce an existing longer form ad, that's a really powerful way of using the 6. So that's one model. Another model that we also saw is one where you have intrinsic value in the ad. And so this is where you actually tell a story. Obviously, it's much more limited. You don't have the same kind of narrative arc that you might have with longer content, but you still can tell a story in 6 seconds. And then there's another situation as well, which is where you're actually using this new six-second real estate in a non-ad pod environment. So you have, for example, in a picture-in-picture ad or somewhere else, you have this opportunity for a relatively short ad. All of these are scenarios where you're delivering value, significant value, with moving to this new format.
But Dr. Varan, when I turn on my TV and watch linear, right, and I go into an ad pod, I can't imagine what it would be like to see just dozens of 6-second ads, back to back to back, etc.
You're absolutely right. So one of the problems that exists with this format is that we know from other work that we've done that the perception of clutter, which is what you're describing, clutter is not a function of time, it's a function of ad units. So if you think of a 3-minute ad break, you might have 6 ads in a 3-minute ad break, or you might have 12 ads in a 3-minute ad break. And the thing that drives the consumer's perception of clutter is the number of ad units, not the amount of time of the ad break. And so if you talk about now going to 6, where you're talking about many more ads, you're going to only increase the effect of the clutter, and that's damaging. So some of the things that we found, for example, if we look at the galvanic skin response, which tells us about the physiological response of people, here we're looking at a situation where you had ad pods. Again, remember, we started with 7-second ads, so you see here where all the ads are either 7 seconds or they're the 30s. You see that you have a very high perception of clutter. That significantly drives down people's physiological arousal during those ads. And likewise, if you had a 15 relative to, say, 30s, that's also going to create more sense of clutter. So you're amplifying that perception of clutter even further when you move to the 6s. And likewise, if you look at what happens here in terms of memory, you could see that with each step as we increase the number of ad units in the same amount of time again, so this is not a function of time, but as you ramp up that, you're increasing again that sense of clutter, which is translating into lower ad impact. So you are absolutely right. Clutter is a problem. If you want to adopt 6-second ads, you have to do that by reducing the length of the ad breaks, which is a positive. But you don't do it by basically keeping the same size and just adding in more ad units, because that's going to increase clutter, which is actually going to diminish ad impact.
So the 6-second ad acts as an additional tool to continue to reinforce the impact of traditional 30s and 15s, but we also need to be careful as to how many 6-second ads we add into an ad break to mitigate clutter.
100%. That's exactly right.
Excellent. Well, on today's episode, we discussed 6-second ad and whether or not 6 seconds is long enough for an ad. Dr. Varan, what say you?
The myth that it's too short is busted.
Well, until next time, I'm Philip Lomax, this is Dr. Dwayne Varan, and thank you, our audience.